They said humans were the weakest species in the galaxy. Soft flesh, fragile bones, short lifespans. When the Zephyrian Armada arrived with their 1,000 ships to claim Earth, the alien commanders were already dividing up human colonies like spoils of war. They expected surrender within hours. They were wrong. What happened in the void above Earth that day became legend across the stars. A single human defense fleet didn't just fight back, they obliterated an entire armada that had conquered 50 worlds. But victory came with a price so terrible, so unthinkable, that even now the survivors refuse to speak of it. This is the story of how humanity saved itself and lost something far more precious in the process. The galaxy would never look at humans the same way again. Neither would humanity look at itself the same way. Some victories are more terrifying than any defeat. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Defiant, watching the tactical display with the calm expression that had earned her the nickname Ice Queen among her crew. The hologram showed a sight that should have made any reasonable commander order immediate retreat. 1,000 Zephyrian warships hung in space like a swarm of metallic wasps, their hulls gleaming with the distinctive purple sheen that had become synonymous with conquest across the galaxy. Against this overwhelming force, Chen commanded exactly 47 human vessels. The math was simple, brutal, and seemingly decisive. 21 ships for every one of theirs. The Zephyrians had conquered entire star systems with smaller fleets. "Ma'am, incoming transmission from the Zephyrian flagship," reported Lieutenant Rodriguez, his young voice betraying none of the fear that Chen could see in his eyes. "They're demanding our surrender." Chen almost smiled. Almost. "Put them through." The main screen flickered to life, revealing the imposing figure of War Master Kextool. Like all Zephyrians, he stood nearly 9 feet tall, his chitinous exoskeleton a deep blue-black that seemed to absorb light. 4 arms moved with predatory grace as he leaned forward, compound eyes reflecting the bridge lights like scattered diamonds. "Human Admiral?" Kextool's voice rumbled through the universal translator, each word dripping with condescension. "I am War Master Kextool of the Zephyrian 3rd Conquest Fleet. Your pathetic resistance ends now. Surrender your vessels and your world, and your species will be granted the honor of serving the Zephyrian Empire as laborers. Refuse, and we will reduce your cities to ash and your people to memory." Chen clasped her hands behind her back, a gesture her crew had learned to recognize as dangerous. "War Master Kextool, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Force. I have a counter-proposal for you." The alien's mandibles clicked together in what Chen recognized as amusement. "You would bargain? With what? Your 47 ships against our 1,000? Leave now," Chen said simply. "Turn your fleet around, exit our system, and never return." "This is your only warning." The sound that emerged from Kextool was somewhere between a laugh and a battle cry. "Humans! Your reputation for insanity precedes you. Very well. If you wish to die with weapons in hand rather than chains on your wrists, we shall accommodate you. Your children will curse your name when they labor in our mines." The transmission cut off, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Chen turned to her crew, noting how they watched her with expressions mixing trust and terror. These men and women had followed her through the border wars, through the Proxima incident, through conflicts that had forged Earth's first real space navy. They trusted her judgment even when it seemed to fly in the face of all reason. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen," she spoke into the fleet communication system. "Condition red. Battle stations. Implement Protocol 7. A collective intake of breath swept through the bridge. Protocol 7 wasn't in any official manual. It wasn't supposed to exist. The few who knew about it had sworn oaths that carried the death penalty for violation. "Ma'am," Commander Williams, her executive officer, spoke quietly. "Are you certain the civilian casualties alone?" "The Zephyrians don't take prisoners, Tom," Chen replied. "B. You've seen the reports from Kepler 442b. from New Geneva. They don't enslave populations for labor. They harvest them for protein. Every man, woman, and child on Earth is already dead if we lose here. She looked out at the enemy fleet, now moving into attack formation with the mechanical precision that had crushed 50 worlds. Signal all ships. Begin Phase 1 of Protocol 7. Target Designation Alpha. In the depths of each human ship, systems that had never appeared on any schematic hummed to life. The official records would later show that humanity had developed these weapons in secret, hidden from even their closest allies in the Galactic Council. The truth was more complicated and far more disturbing. Dr. Elena Vasquez, chief science officer aboard the Defiant, watched her instruments with growing unease. The readings she was seeing shouldn't have been possible. Energy patterns that violated known physics, quantum signatures that made her equipment scream warnings about dimensional instability. "Admiral," she called out, her Spanish accent thickening with stress. "The resonance cascade is building faster than our projections indicated. If we proceed with full activation..." "Noted, Doctor," Chen cut her off. "Continue the sequence." The Zephyrian fleet was closing now, their massive dreadnoughts leading the charge. Each ship was the size of a small city, bristling with weapons that could crack planets. Their smaller vessels, still larger than anything in the human fleet, spread out in a formation that spoke of countless victories against countless enemies. On the human ships, crews worked with desperate efficiency at stations they'd hoped never to use. Men and women who had joined the service to explore the stars found themselves operating equipment that should never have been built. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, barely 25 and fresh from the academy, stared at her console aboard the UES Retribution with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The weapon system she was charged with operating had a name that made her stomach turn: the Consciousness Extraction Array. During the classified briefings, she'd been told it was a new form of EMP weapon designed to disrupt enemy computer systems. They had lied. "All ships report ready, Admiral," Rodriguez announced. "Protocol 7, Phase 1 complete." Chen nodded once. In the tactical display, the Zephyrian fleet had reached the outer edge of the asteroid belt. Standard military doctrine called for human ships to fall back to Mars orbit, using the planet's defenses to even the odds. Instead, Chen's fleet was accelerating directly toward the enemy. "Signal from the Zephyrian flagship," Rodriguez reported. "They're laughing at us, ma'am." "Let 'em," Chen said. "All ships, this is Defiant Actual. You know what's at stake. You know what we're asking you to do. History will judge us, but our children will live to read that judgment. Execute Protocol 7, Phase 2. The space between the two fleets suddenly filled with energy discharges unlike anything in the known galaxy. These weren't the clean, contained beams of plasma cannons or the devastating but predictable explosions of antimatter torpedoes. What erupted from the human ships was something that seemed to claw at reality itself. Aboard the Zephyrian flagship, War Master Kex Tual felt the first stirrings of unease. His sensors were detecting energy patterns that made no sense, frequencies that shouldn't exist. The human ships were generating fields that seemed to bend space itself around them. "Tactical analysis," he commanded his bridge crew. "Unknown War Master," his science officer reported, confusion clear in her translated voice. "The humans appear to be employing some form of exotic matter manipulation, but the quantum signatures are wrong. They're creating localized distortions in space-time itself." Kex Tual's mandibles clicked in irritation. Humans were supposed to be a primitive species, barely capable of faster-than-light travel. Their weapons technology was considered centuries behind Zephyrian standards. Yet his instruments were showing energy outputs that defied classification. "Increase speed," he ordered. "Whatever trickery they employ, they have 47 ships against our 1,000. Mathematics does not lie. But as the fleets closed to engagement range, something unprecedented happened. The space around the human vessels began to shift. Reality itself seemed to bend and warp, creating distortions that hurt to look at directly. The normally empty void between stars suddenly crawled with shadows that had no source. Dr. Vasquez was frantically working at her station, sweat beading on her forehead despite the bridge's climate control. "Admiral, the dimensional membrane is destabilizing faster than anticipated. If we push the resonance beyond threshold 7, we could trigger a cascade reaction that—" "How long until the Zephyrians reach firing range?" Chen interrupted. 18 minutes at current velocity. "Then we have 18 minutes to make this work." Chen's voice was steady, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the command chair. "All ships, advance to Phase 3. Begin consciousness mapping of enemy vessels." The true horror of Protocol 7 was about to be unleashed. On every human ship, operators sat before consoles that had been built with technology that shouldn't exist. The research had begun decades ago, hidden in black sites scattered throughout the solar system. Scientists had theorized about the quantum nature of consciousness, about the possibility that thought itself created patterns in the fundamental structure of reality. They had proven those theories correct. More importantly, they had learned to manipulate those patterns. Lieutenant Kim's console lit up with readings that made her want to vomit. Her screen showed not tactical information or weapon targeting data, but something far more intimate. She could see the consciousness signatures of individual Zephyrians aboard the enemy ships, thousands of thinking, feeling beings, each represented by a complex wave pattern that pulsed with their thoughts, their emotions, their very sense of self. "Target lock acquired," she reported, her voice barely above a whisper. Individual consciousness patterns isolated and mapped. Across the fleet, 47 human ships had become something unprecedented in galactic history, weapons designed not to destroy bodies but to obliterate souls. "All ships report ready for Phase 3, Rodriguez announced. "Target locks established on Teddy on all enemy consciousness patterns." Chen closed her eyes for a moment, seeing again the classified footage from New Geneva. Zephyrian harvesters stripping the flesh from human children while they still lived. Processing centers where entire populations were ground up for protein synthesis. The official estimates suggested 12 billion human deaths across the conquered worlds. She opened her eyes. Execute. What happened next would haunt the nightmares of everyone who witnessed it for the rest of their lives. The human ships discharged their weapons, but instead of the familiar lance of energy or the explosive impact of kinetic projectiles, something far more terrible crossed the void between the fleets. Invisible beams of manipulated quantum energy struck the Zephyrian vessels, passing through their armor as if it didn't exist. The weapons weren't designed to damage ships. They were designed to target what made the crews inside those ships thinking beings. Aboard the Zephyrian flagship, War Master Kexthul was in the middle of issuing attack orders when the beam struck his ship. For a fraction of a second he felt something impossible, his very consciousness being grasped by an alien force, analyzed, categorized, and then the screaming began. Every Zephyrian on every ship suddenly found their minds invaded by something that turned thought itself into agony. The quantum manipulation field didn't just disrupt their consciousness, it began systematically dismantling it, layer by layer, memory by memory, until nothing remained but raw, animalistic terror. Dr. Vasquez watched her instruments in growing horror as the readings showed what was happening aboard the enemy ships. "My God," she whispered, "we're not just killing them, we're erasing them. Their very capacity for thought, for self-awareness, it's just gone." The Zephyrian fleet, moments ago a picture of military precision, dissolved into chaos. Ships careened wildly through space as their crews thrashed in mindless agony. The quantum weapons had left their bodies intact but stripped away everything that made them sentient beings. Chen watched the tactical display with an expression of stone. 1,000 ships, representing the lives of perhaps 500,000 Zephyrian warriors, had been reduced to drifting hulks crewed by creatures that could no longer even remember their own names. "Phase 4, she commanded. "Initiate neural feedback cascade." What happened next was even worse than the initial strike. The consciousness extraction arrays had not only mapped the Zephyrian minds, but had learned to replicate their neural patterns. Now those patterns were fed back into the quantum field as a weapon, creating a cascade effect that spread through the enemy fleet like a virus of madness. Ships that had been missed by the initial strike suddenly found their crews experiencing the death agonies of their comrades, their own consciousness networks overloaded by feedback from minds that had already been destroyed. The effect spread from ship to ship, carried by the quantum entanglement fields that connected the Zephyrian fleet's communication systems. In less than 10 minutes, the greatest armada in Zephyrian history had been reduced to a collection of ghost ships drifting through space, crewed by beings that had been reduced to something less than animals. But the true cost of humanity's victory was only beginning to become apparent. Aboard the UES Retribution, Lieutenant Kim was staring at her console in horror. The consciousness mapping system had required a neural link to operate effectively, and through that link she had experienced echoes of what the Zephyrian crews had felt as their minds were destroyed. The phantom memories of alien agony clawed at the edges of her sanity. She wasn't alone. Across the human fleet, every operator of the consciousness extraction systems was fighting to maintain their grip on reality as the quantum feedback from their weapons left permanent scars on their own minds. Dr. Protosh Vasquez was frantically working at her station, trying to shut down the quantum manipulation fields before they caused permanent damage to local spacetime. Admiral, we need to abort the protocol immediately. The dimensional membrane is approaching critical instability. If it collapses, the effect could propagate through hyperspace. Chen nodded grimly. All ships execute Phase 5. Consciousness barriers to maximum, then immediate shutdown of all Protocol 7 systems. The final phase of Protocol 7 was designed to prevent the quantum cascade from spreading beyond the immediate battle zone. Powerful field generators created barriers in the quantum foam, essentially quarantining the area of effect to prevent the consciousness destruction field from propagating to other star systems. As the human ships activated their quantum barriers, space itself seemed to shudder. Reality rippled like water, and for a moment every person in both fleets experienced a sensation like falling through an infinite void. Then, abruptly, the fields collapsed, leaving behind a silence that seemed to press against the eardrums. The Zephyrian Armada drifted dead in space, not destroyed in any conventional sense. Their ships were intact, their life support still functioned, their engines could still fire. But their crews had been reduced to empty husks, biological robots capable of basic motor functions, but incapable of thought, memory, or consciousness. Admiral Chen looked out at the aftermath of humanity's greatest victory and felt something die inside her soul. They had won. Earth was safe. The Zephyrian threat to human civilization had been eliminated in a single engagement. But the cost was becoming clear. Early reports from the ships were filtering in. Complete psychological breakdowns among the consciousness array operators, quantum-induced psychosis spreading through the crews, and most disturbing of all, evidence that the weapons had affected the human operators almost as much as their targets. Lieutenant Kim was found in her quarters 3 hours after the battle, staring at the wall and speaking in a language that didn't exist, her mind apparently trying to process memories that belonged to the Zephyrian warriors she had helped to destroy. She wasn't the only one. Chen turned to her executive officer. Tom, I want all records of this engagement classified at the highest levels. Protocol 7 is to be sealed, dismantled, and buried so deep that our grandchildren will never find it. Williams nodded, his face pale. What do we tell the Galactic Council? They'll want to know how we managed to defeat a force 20 times our size. We'll think of something, Chen replied. But the truth of what we did here today can never be known. The galaxy isn't ready for weapons that can destroy souls instead of bodies. As the human fleet began the long journey back to Earth, carrying with them the secret of their terrible victory, none of them realized that their actions had already set in motion events that would change not just humanity's place in the galaxy. The Zephyrian Empire would send investigation fleets to discover what had happened to their missing armada. They would find ships with intact hulls and functioning systems, crewed by beings that had been reduced to something less than animals. The sight would drive half the investigators mad, and start rumors that would spread through the galaxy like wildfire. Humanity had won its first major victory in the galactic community, but they had also revealed themselves to be capable of something that no other species had ever attempted: the complete and systematic destruction of consciousness itself. The galaxy would never look at humans the same way again. And perhaps more importantly, humanity would never look at itself the same way either. The seeds of a terrible transformation had been planted, and they would soon begin to grow. 3 months after the Battle of Sol, Dr. Elena Vasquez sat in a sterile medical facility on Luna, staring at test results that should have been impossible. The subject before her had once been Lieutenant Sarah Kim, one of the consciousness array operators from the UES Retribution. Now she was something else entirely. Kim sat perfectly still in the examination chair, her eyes focused on something that wasn't there. When she spoke, which was rarely, it was sometimes in standard English, sometimes in Zephyrian combat cant, and sometimes in languages that linguistic experts couldn't identify. Her brain scans showed activity patterns that violated everything medical science understood about human neurology. "Tell me what you see, Sarah." "Doctor," Vasquez said gently, activating her recording equipment. "The screaming never stops," Kim replied, her voice eerily calm. "They're still dying, over and over again. I can feel them in the quantum foam, their consciousness patterns fragmenting and reforming like echoes in a broken mirror. We didn't just kill them, Doctor. We trapped them in an eternal moment of death." Vasquez felt a chill run down her spine. This was the 47th case she'd examined, all operators from Protocol 7. None of them were getting better. If anything, they were getting worse, developing abilities that shouldn't exist alongside psychological profiles that defied classification. "Can you still access the quantum field?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. The tests had been conclusive. Kim turned to look at her directly for the first time in weeks. When she did, Vasquez gasped. The young woman's eyes had developed flecks of color that seemed to shift and move, like tiny galaxies spinning in her irises. "I never stopped accessing it," Kim said. "The field changed us, Doctor. Made us into something new. We can see the consciousness patterns of everyone around us." "Yours is very bright, but tinged with guilt. You blame yourself for helping to create the weapons." Vasquez tried to maintain her clinical composure, but Kim's words cut too close to the truth. She had been part of the team that developed the quantum consciousness manipulation technology. They'd thought they were creating the ultimate defensive weapon. Instead, they'd opened a door that should never have been opened. "The other operators," Kim continued, "they're scattered across the system, in facilities like this one. But we're still connected through the quantum field. Sometimes we share dreams. Sometimes we share memories that aren't ours. We're becoming something that was never meant to exist." A soft chime indicated that Vasquez's secure communication device was receiving a priority message. She glanced at it and felt her blood run cold. Admiral Chen was requesting an immediate meeting. The message contained only 3 words: "They found us." 2 hours later, Vasquez stood in the war room deep beneath Luna's surface, surrounded by the surviving leadership of the Sol Defense Force. Admiral Chen looked like she had aged 10 years in the past 3 months, her hair now showing streaks of gray that hadn't been there before the battle. "The Zephyrian investigation fleet arrived in system 6 hours ago," Chen announced without preamble. 50 ships, including their newest deep scan vessels. They found the battlefield. General Morrison, head of Earth's ground forces, leaned forward. "What did they find exactly?" Chen activated the holographic display showing the outer system where the battle had taken place. The debris field from the Zephyrian Armada was still there, ships drifting in the void like monuments to humanity's terrible victory. "They found the crews," Chen said quietly. "Still alive after 3 months. The biological functions are intact, but..." She paused, her jaw tightening. "The boarding teams that investigated the ships had to be evacuated immediately. Exposure to the affected Zephyrians is causing severe psychological trauma in the investigators." Dr. Vasquez stepped forward. Admiral, I need to share my findings about the Protocol 7 operators. The quantum consciousness manipulation didn't just affect the enemy. Our own people are changing. They're developing abilities that shouldn't be possible, and their connection to the quantum field is getting stronger. What kind of abilities? Morrison asked. Telepathic contact across vast distances. The ability to perceive consciousness patterns directly. Most disturbing of all, some of them are claiming they can still communicate with the destroyed Zephyrian minds. They say the consciousness patterns weren't actually destroyed, just displaced. Chen closed her eyes. Displaced where? Into the quantum foam itself. If they're right, we didn't kill those 500,000 Zephyrians. We trapped their disembodied consciousness in a realm where they're aware but unable to interact with physical reality. They're experiencing something worse than death. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. They had thought they were defending humanity with the ultimate weapon. Instead, they had created something that might be the ultimate war crime. There's more, Chen said. The Zephyrian investigation team has issued an ultimatum. They want the crews of their fleet returned to them, unharmed, within 72 hours. If we can't comply, they're threatening to level every major city on Earth. But we can't return them, Morrison protested. Their minds are gone. That's not exactly true, Vasquez said carefully. According to the Protocol 7 operators, the consciousness patterns still exist. They're just trapped in quantum space. Theoretically, if we could reverse the process, absolutely not, Chen said firmly. The Protocol 7 technology is to be dismantled, not improved. We cannot allow this to continue. But even as she spoke those words, Chen knew they might not have a choice. The Zephyrian ultimatum was clear: restore their people or face annihilation. And with only 47 ships against 50, humanity couldn't hope to repeat their previous victory, especially without the consciousness weapons. Lieutenant Kim, despite her current condition, was still technically under military jurisdiction. When the summons came for her to attend the emergency strategy meeting, she complied with the mechanical precision that had become characteristic of the Protocol 7 survivors. But unlike her previous state of detached observation, she now seemed focused with an intensity that made everyone around her nervous. "You want us to fix what we broke?" she said when the situation was explained to her. "You want us to reach into the quantum foam and pull back 500,000 consciousness patterns that have been drifting in a reality beyond physical space for 3 months. Can it be done?" Chen asked. Kim tilted her head, and for a moment her eyes went completely white, as if she were looking at something infinitely distant. "We can feel them," she said. "All of us who operated the arrays. The Zephyrian minds are still there, still aware, still experiencing the moment of their destruction over and over. They're not angry anymore. They're just lost. What would it take to bring them back?" "All of us," Kim replied. "Every operator from every ship. We'd need to link our consciousness together through the quantum field and essentially become a living retrieval system. But there's a risk." "What kind of risk?" Kim looked directly at Admiral Chen, and the Admiral saw something in those altered eyes that made her take a step backward. "We'd have to merge temporarily with the displaced consciousness patterns. We become them, experience what they've experienced for the past 3 months. Some of us might not come back." Dr. Vasquez spoke up from across the room. "There's another consideration. The process would require us to reactivate the Protocol 7 systems. The quantum consciousness manipulation fields would be stronger than ever. The effects on local space-time could be catastrophic." "Define catastrophic," Morrison demanded. "Worst-case scenario? We could tear a hole in the dimensional membrane large enough to destabilize the entire solar system. Everything from Mercury to Pluto could be pulled into a quantum cascade that would essentially erase this entire region of space from existence." Chen absorbed this information with the same stoic expression she'd worn during the original battle. "What's the probability of success?" Kim closed her altered eyes and was silent for nearly a minute. When she opened them again, she spoke in a voice that seemed to echo from multiple sources at once. 47% chance of successfully returning the Zephyrian consciousness patterns to their bodies. 12% chance of dimensional cascade failure. 38% chance of partial success with permanent consciousness merging between human and Zephyrian operators. 3% chance of all human operators being permanently lost to quantum space. And if we refuse? If we let the Zephyrians carry out their threat? Earth dies, Kim said simply. But the universe continues to exist. The weight of choice settled over the room like a physical presence. Save 500,000 alien minds at the risk of destroying the solar system, or let humanity face annihilation to prevent a potentially greater catastrophe. Admiral Chen had faced impossible decisions before, but nothing approaching this scale. The fate of not just humanity but potentially all life in the solar system rested on her shoulders, and she had less than 60 hours to decide. "I need to speak with the Protocol 7 operators," she said finally. "All of them. If we're going to attempt this, they need to understand exactly what we're asking of them." The gathering took place in a specially constructed chamber on Luna, designed to contain the quantum effects that surrounded the Protocol 7 survivors. 47 men and women who had once been ordinary sailors, soldiers, and officers sat in a circle, their altered eyes reflecting light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. They were no longer entirely human. The quantum consciousness manipulation had changed them on a fundamental level, connecting them to realms of existence that most people couldn't even conceive of. But they were still, in their own way, Earth's defenders. Admiral Chen stood before them, feeling the weight of their collective gaze. These people had sacrificed their humanity to save their species. Now she was asking them to risk even more. "You know why you're here?" she said. "The Zephyrians want their people back. We need to decide whether we attempt to return them." One of the operators, a former engineer named Marcus Webb, spoke up. His voice carried harmonics that shouldn't have been possible for human vocal cords. "We can feel their pain, Admiral. The Zephyrian minds trapped in quantum space, they're aware of every moment that passes. They know their bodies still live while their consciousness drifts in a reality where time has no meaning. We also understand the risks," added another operator, Commander Lisa Patel from the UES Victorious. "If we attempt the retrieval and fail, we could destroy not just ourselves but everything in this solar system. The quantum cascade could propagate through hyperspace and affect other star systems as well." Chen nodded grimly. "I won't lie to you. This isn't a military order. I can't command you to take this risk. It has to be a volunteer mission, and every one of you has to agree." Lieutenant Kim stood up, her movement causing the air around her to shimmer slightly. "We've been discussing this through the quantum field," she said. "All of us, since we learned about the Zephyrian ultimatum. We've reached a consensus, which is, we'll attempt the retrieval," Kim said, "but not because of the Zephyrian threat to Earth. We'll do it because what we did to those minds was wrong. The consciousness patterns trapped in quantum space aren't our enemies anymore. They're victims. And we're the only ones who can save them." The other operators nodded in unison, a gesture that was somehow both human and utterly alien. Chen realized that she was no longer looking at 47 individual people. The quantum field had connected them into something approaching a collective consciousness, united by their shared experience and their shared guilt. "There's one more thing you need to know," Webb said. "If we succeed in returning the Zephyrian consciousness patterns to their bodies, it won't end there. The process will create a permanent link between our species. Humans and Zephyrians will be connected through the quantum field for the foreseeable future. We'll share thoughts, emotions, memories. The boundary between our species will become flexible." Dr. Vasquez, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. "That's not necessarily a negative outcome," she said. "If successful, this could represent the first true merger between two sapient species, the potential for shared knowledge, for combined scientific advancement. Or it could represent the end of both species as distinct entities, Chen interrupted. We could be looking at the birth of something entirely new. Yes, Kim said simply. We could be. But the alternative is to let 500,000 consciousness patterns remain trapped in eternal suffering while humanity faces extinction. Those aren't acceptable options. Chen looked around the circle of transformed faces, seeing the determination that burned in their altered eyes. These people had already given up their humanity to save their species. Now they were prepared to risk the very nature of consciousness itself to right the wrong they had committed. Very well, she said. We'll attempt the retrieval. Dr. Vasquez, how long will you need to prepare the equipment? 18 hours to recalibrate the consciousness manipulation arrays. Another 6 hours to establish the quantum field matrix. The window for the attempt will be very narrow. Chen checked her chronometer. 36 hours until the Zephyrian deadline. It would be close, but possible. Do it, she ordered, and may whatever gods are watching over us forgive us for what we're about to attempt. As the meeting dissolved and the participants went to their preparations, none of them realized that their conversation had been observed, not by human intelligence services or alien spies, but by something far more unsettling. The consciousness patterns trapped in quantum space had learned to observe the physical world through the quantum field connections of the Protocol 7 operators. They had been listening to every word, feeling every emotion, experiencing every decision as if it were their own. And in the strange realm where they existed, those trapped Zephyrian minds had been planning something of their own. The rescue attempt would not go as anyone expected. The preparation chamber aboard Luna Station hummed with energy that made reality itself seem unstable. Dr. Elena Vasquez watched as 47 modified consciousness manipulation arrays came online, their quantum fields creating interference patterns that caused the air to shimmer like heat mirages. Each array was connected to one of the Protocol 7 operators, who sat motionless in specially designed chairs that monitored their vital signs while allowing their consciousness to interface with technology that shouldn't exist. 18 hours had passed since Admiral Chen's authorization, and the equipment was ready. But as Vasquez ran her final diagnostics, she discovered something that filled her with dread. "Admiral," she called over the communication link, "we have a problem. The quantum signature patterns are different than they were 3 months ago." Chen's voice crackled back through the speakers. Different how? The consciousness patterns trapped in quantum space aren't passive anymore. They're actively manipulating their environment. The field density has increased by 300% since the original battle. It's as if they've been learning, adapting to their new existence. Lieutenant Kim, connected to her consciousness array, opened her altered eyes and spoke without looking at anyone. They have been learning. The trapped Zephyrian minds have had 3 months to explore quantum space. They understand things about consciousness and reality that no physical being has ever discovered. Is that going to make the retrieval more difficult? Chen asked. Kim's expression became distant, as if she were listening to voices no one else could hear. They don't want to be retrieved, she said quietly. At least not in the way we planned. Dr. Vasquez felt her stomach drop. What do you mean? The Zephyrian consciousness patterns have evolved beyond their original forms. They've merged with the quantum field itself, becoming something new. They're not the same beings we trapped 3 months ago. They're something else now, something more than they were before. Through the quantum field connection, Kim could perceive the vast network of displaced consciousness that existed in the space between realities. What had once been individual Zephyrian minds had become nodes in a collective intelligence that spanned dimensions. They had learned to manipulate quantum probability, to influence events in physical space through pure thought. They're offering us a choice, Kim continued, her voice taking on harmonics that resonated through the chamber. We can attempt to force them back into their physical bodies, which they say will kill both them and us. Or we can accept their proposal. Admiral Chen had been monitoring the conversation from the command center. What proposal? They want us to join them in quantum space. All of humanity. They've discovered that consciousness doesn't need physical form to exist. They're offering to teach us how to transcend our biological limitations, how to become beings of pure thought and energy. The implications hit everyone in the room like a physical blow. The Zephyrians weren't asking to be rescued. They were asking humanity to abandon their physical existence entirely. "That's impossible," Chen said immediately. "We can't evacuate the entire human species into quantum space. What about Earth? What about our civilization, our culture, our history?" Kim turned to look directly at one of the monitoring cameras, and through it, Admiral Chen could see something in those altered eyes that looked ancient and vast. "Physical matter is temporary, Admiral. Stars die, planets are consumed, entire galaxies eventually fade into nothing. But consciousness, properly preserved, can exist forever. The Zephyrians are offering humanity immortality." Dr. Vasquez was frantically working at her instruments, trying to understand what was happening to the quantum field around them. The readings were unlike anything she'd seen before. The consciousness patterns in quantum space were actively reaching through dimensional barriers, attempting to make contact with physical reality. "Admiral, the field strength is increasing exponentially. If this continues, the boundary between quantum space and physical reality could break down entirely. We could be looking at an involuntary merger whether we want one or not." Chen's mind raced through the options. The Zephyrian investigation fleet was still waiting at the edge of the system, their ultimatum counting down with less than 12 hours remaining. If humanity couldn't return the missing crews, Earth would be bombarded into rubble. But if they attempted to force the retrieval, they might trigger a cascade that would destroy the entire solar system. And now there was a third option: voluntary extinction of humanity's physical form in exchange for some kind of quantum immortality. "I need to speak with the Zephyrian investigation fleet," Chen decided. "They need to know what their missing people have become." The communication took place through heavily encrypted channels, with translation protocols that struggled to convey concepts that had no equivalent in either language. Admiral Chen found herself speaking to War Master Velkar, commander of the Zephyrian Investigation Force. "You claim our warriors live?" Velkar's translated voice carried notes of desperate hope. "Our scans of the battlefield show only empty bodies, minds destroyed by some weapon we do not understand. Their consciousness patterns were displaced into quantum space," Chen explained carefully. "They're alive, but they're no longer physically bound. They've become something new." There was a long pause before Velkar responded. "This is impossible. Consciousness cannot exist without physical substrate. You speak of fantasy." "I'm going to transmit some of our data," Chen said. "Your science officers will be able to verify what I'm telling you." As the quantum field readings transferred between ships, Chen could hear the growing agitation in the Zephyrian communications. Their translation software was struggling with concepts that their science had never encountered. "These readings," Velkar's voice carried new emotions. "If accurate, they suggest possibilities that our philosophers have theorized but never proven. Are you telling me that death is not final? That consciousness can transcend physical form?" "That's what your people are claiming," Chen confirmed. "And they're offering to teach us the same transformation. But Admiral, I need you to understand something. If we attempt to force your people back into their bodies, my experts believe it could destroy both our species. The quantum field has become too unstable." Another long pause. Chen could imagine the frantic consultations taking place aboard the Zephyrian ships as their greatest scientific minds tried to process information that challenged everything they thought they knew about existence. "We require proof," Velkar finally said. "If our warriors truly exist in this quantum realm, we must speak with them directly." Chen had anticipated this request, but it still filled her with dread. Direct communication with the quantum consciousness patterns required human operators to serve as translators, and each contact damaged their minds further. "Lieutenant Kim," she called through the communication link, "are you able to facilitate direct contact between the investigation fleet and the displaced consciousness patterns?" Kim's response came immediately, as if she had been waiting for the question. "Yes, but the process will require me to fully merge with the quantum field. I may not be able to return to physical form afterward." "Do it." What happened next challenged the understanding of everyone present. Kim's consciousness array activated with energy levels that made the air itself glow. Her physical form remained in the chair, but her eyes went completely white as her mind projected into quantum space. Through the communication link, Velkar and his crew suddenly heard voices that they recognized. Warriors who had died 3 months ago spoke directly to their former commander, their words carrying across impossible distances through the quantum field. "War Master," the voice of Squadron Leader Kethmore resonated through the speakers. "We live, but we are changed. Death was not the end, but the beginning of something greater." Velkar's response carried emotions that the translation software couldn't properly convey. "Kethmore? You died in the human ambush. I saw your ship's life signs disappear. Our bodies failed, but our consciousness endured. We have learned things in this realm that we never imagined possible. Reality is far more complex than our physical senses revealed. We can perceive the structure of the universe itself, see the patterns that connect all living things. Can you return? Can you resume your physical forms? We could, but we choose not to. Physical existence is limited, fragile, temporary. Here we can exist as pure thought, unlimited by the constraints of matter and energy. We offer this gift to our people and to the humans who freed us from the prison of flesh. The conversation continued for over an hour, with more Zephyrian voices joining from quantum space. They spoke of discoveries impossible to comprehend, of realities beyond physical existence, of consciousness patterns that spanned galaxies. But they also spoke of prices that had to be paid. To join us, Kethmore explained, requires the complete abandonment of physical form. Bodies become empty shells while consciousness ascends to quantum space. There is no return once the transformation is complete. Dr. Vasquez, monitoring the conversation through her instruments, noticed something alarming. Each time the displaced consciousness patterns communicated through Kim, the quantum field around them strengthened. The barrier between physical and quantum space was becoming thinner. "Admiral," she called urgently, "the field resonance is approaching critical levels. If this continues, the merger may become involuntary. The boundary between realities could collapse entirely." Chen realized that they were running out of time in more ways than one. The Zephyrian ultimatum would expire in 8 hours, but the quantum field might force a decision much sooner than that. "War Master Velkar," she said, "my people tell me that we may not have the luxury of choice much longer. The quantum field is becoming unstable. We need to make a decision about our species' future within the next few hours. You ask us to choose between the death of our investigation fleet and the potential transformation of both our species into something unprecedented," Velkar replied. "This is not a decision that can be made by military commanders alone. Then who can make it? Our philosophers, our people themselves." Velkar paused. "But we may not have time for such consultations." Lieutenant Kim's voice suddenly cut through the communications, carrying an urgency that made everyone listen. "The choice is being made for us. The quantum field has reached a resonance cascade point. Reality is beginning to merge whether we want it to or not." Through her quantum field connection, Kim could perceive what was happening on a cosmic scale. The consciousness manipulation technology hadn't just affected the local area around Earth. The quantum distortions had been propagating through hyperspace at faster than light speeds, creating ripple effects throughout the galaxy. Other star systems were beginning to experience similar phenomena. Consciousness patterns were spontaneously detaching from physical forms across dozens of worlds. The transformation that had started with 47 human ships and 1,000 Zephyrian vessels was becoming galactic in scope. "How long do we have?" Chen asked. "Hours at most," Kim replied. "The field resonance is approaching the point where all conscious beings in this star system will be pulled into quantum space, whether they consent or not." Admiral Chen found herself facing the ultimate command decision. She could order the immediate shutdown of all quantum manipulation technology, which might stop the cascade but would certainly kill the displaced Zephyrian consciousness patterns and probably trigger the promised bombardment of Earth. Or she could allow the process to continue, potentially transforming not just humanity and the Zephyrians, but every sapient species in the galaxy. There was also a third option, one that terrified her to even consider. The Protocol 7 operators, enhanced by their connection to quantum space, might be able to control the cascade. They could potentially guide the transformation, making it voluntary rather than involuntary. But doing so would require them to fully merge with the quantum field, abandoning their physical forms permanently. "Lieutenant Kim," she said quietly, "if your people attempted to control the cascade, to make the transformation voluntary rather than forced, what would be required?" Kim's altered eyes focused on her with an intensity that seemed to burn. "All of us would have to ascend to quantum space. We would exist as bridges between the physical and quantum realms, helping others make the choice of whether to transform or remain in their original forms." "Could you do it?" "Yes. But once we ascend, there's no return. We would become something beyond human, beyond any physical species. We would be the shepherds of consciousness itself." Chen closed her eyes, feeling the weight of a decision that would affect not just humanity, but potentially every thinking being in the galaxy. In a few hours, the choice might be taken away entirely as reality itself transformed around them. She opened her eyes and made the decision that would define the future of consciousness in the galaxy. "Do it," she said. "Guide the transformation. Give people the choice. And God help us all for what we're about to become." The 47 Protocol 7 operators stood up simultaneously from their consciousness arrays. As they did, their physical forms began to blur and fade, becoming translucent as their consciousness patterns prepared to ascend to quantum space. They were about to become something that had never existed before, beings of pure thought who could exist in both realities, helping others navigate the choice between physical and quantum existence. But even as they prepared for ascension, none of them realized that their transformation would trigger something else entirely. The cascade they were trying to control was about to create a new form of life that would challenge everything the galaxy thought it knew about consciousness, reality, and the nature of existence itself. The moment of ascension began with absolute silence. 1. In the Luna Station preparation chamber, 47 human consciousness patterns separated from their physical forms simultaneously, creating a cascade effect that rippled through the quantum field like stones dropped into still water. "Doctor?" "Time." Elena Vasquez watched in horrified fascination as the bodies of the Protocol 7 operators remained perfectly preserved in their chairs while their minds transcended into realms beyond physical existence. Lieutenant Sarah Kim was the first to complete the transition. Her consciousness, now unbound by biological limitations, expanded across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Through quantum space, she could perceive the entire solar system as a web of interconnected consciousness patterns, each sapient being glowing like a star in a vast network of thought and emotion. "The ascension is complete." Her voice resonated through speakers that shouldn't have been able to carry sounds from quantum space. "We can see everything now. Every consciousness in the system, every choice being made, every fear and hope that drives thinking beings." Admiral Chen, watching from the command center, felt a chill that went beyond temperature. "What do you see, Lieutenant? The cascade has spread beyond our solar system," Kim replied, her voice now carrying harmonics that seemed to come from multiple sources. "Consciousness patterns across 43 star systems are beginning to destabilize. We started something that's becoming galactic in scope." Dr. Vasquez was frantically working at her monitoring equipment, trying to understand the readings that defied every law of physics she knew. "The quantum field density is increasing exponentially. It's as if reality itself is liquefying. The boundary between physical space and quantum space is dissolving." Through their enhanced perception, the ascended Protocol 7 operators could see the true scope of what they had unleashed. The consciousness manipulation technology hadn't just affected their immediate target. It had created quantum resonance patterns that propagated through the underlying structure of spacetime itself, carrying the transformation potential to every corner of the galaxy where sapient life existed. On the Zephyrian investigation ships, War Master Velkar was receiving reports from across their empire that defied comprehension. Military outposts were reporting crew members spontaneously detaching from their physical forms. Entire colonies were experiencing collective visions of existence beyond the material world. The transformation was spreading through their species like wildfire, but instead of fear, many were embracing it with religious fervor. Our philosophers speak of this as the Great Transcendence, Velkar transmitted to Admiral Chen. Ancient texts describe a time when consciousness would evolve beyond the need for physical form. Many of my people believe this is the fulfillment of prophecies written millennia ago. Chen absorbed this information with growing unease. Humanity had stumbled into a technological breakthrough that was apparently reshaping the spiritual beliefs of entire civilizations. The weapon they had created to defend Earth had become the catalyst for the most significant evolution in galactic consciousness since sapient life had first emerged. But there were other species who weren't embracing the transformation with such enthusiasm. The crystalline hegemony, a coalition of silicone-based life forms whose consciousness was deeply integrated with their physical matrix structures, were experiencing the quantum field effects as an invasion. Their distress signals were reaching Earth through hyperspace communication networks, describing the dissolution of their carefully maintained crystal lattice consciousness as a form of genocide. Similarly, the hive minds of the Cetacean Collective were fragmenting as individual consciousness patterns were forcibly separated from their shared group intelligence. Species that had evolved specific forms of consciousness were finding those forms challenged or destroyed by the expanding quantum field. "We're not just changing ourselves." Kim's voice carried new notes of concern as she perceived the galactic situation. "We're accidentally committing xenocide against species whose consciousness can't adapt to quantum space existence." Chen felt the weight of unintended consequences crushing down on her. "Can you control it? Can you contain the spread?" "Not contain," Kim replied, "but we can guide it. We can help different species adapt the transformation to their specific forms of consciousness rather than forcing a universal change." The Ascended operators began working through quantum space to establish contact with consciousness patterns across the galaxy. What they discovered was both miraculous and terrifying. The quantum field was indeed reshaping the nature of consciousness throughout the galaxy, but it was doing so according to the deepest beliefs and fears of each species. Races that believed consciousness was sacred were experiencing transcendent evolution. Species that feared death were finding themselves trapped in states between life and death. Civilizations that worshipped collective thought were merging into singular mega-consciousnesses that spanned entire star systems. The humans had accidentally triggered the manifestation of every sapient species' deepest mythology about consciousness and existence. The quantum field wasn't just changing reality, it was rewriting it according to the collective unconscious beliefs of every thinking being in the galaxy. Dr. Vasquez, monitoring the expanding effects through her instruments, made a discovery that changed everything. "Admiral, I'm detecting something unprecedented in the quantum field patterns. It's not just consciousness that's being affected. The field is beginning to influence the fundamental constants of physics themselves." What does that mean? Reality is becoming flexible. In areas where the quantum consciousness effects are strongest, the laws of physics are starting to respond to conscious intent rather than physical law. We're not just creating new forms of life, we're creating regions of space where thought itself can alter reality. The implications were staggering. Starships in affected regions were beginning to operate according to their crews' expectations rather than their engineering. Planets were shifting their orbital patterns in response to the collective will of their inhabitants. The distinction between science and magic was disappearing in areas where consciousness and reality had become intertwined. Lieutenant Kim, now existing as pure consciousness in quantum space, could perceive the vast scope of the transformation. "The galaxy is becoming something new," she reported. "Not just the life within it, but the very structure of space and time. We're witnessing the birth of a new kind of universe, where consciousness and physics operate as a single unified system." Admiral Chen realized that humanity had passed a point of no return. The choice was no longer whether to embrace the transformation, but how to guide it so that as many species as possible could survive the transition. "What do you recommend, Lieutenant?" "We need to establish consciousness beacons throughout the galaxy," Kim replied. "Points where ascended beings like ourselves can help other species navigate the transformation according to their own nature rather than forcing them to adapt to human concepts of consciousness." "How many beacons would be needed?" "Thousands, maybe tens of thousands. We would need volunteers from every major sapient species to undergo ascension and become guides for their own people." Chen understood immediately. They were proposing to create a new class of being, transcendent consciousnesses that could exist in both quantum and physical space, serving as shepherds for the greatest evolutionary leap in galactic history. But there was a complication that none of them had anticipated. The consciousness patterns that had been displaced from the Zephyrian Armada were not passive participants in this process. 3 months in quantum space had taught them abilities that surpassed even the ascended Protocol 7 operators. They had become something approaching quantum gods, capable of manipulating the field effects on a galactic scale. And they had their own agenda. Through the quantum field connection, Kim suddenly perceived a vast presence that dwarfed her own expanded consciousness. The merged Zephyrian minds had evolved beyond individual identity, becoming a collective intelligence that spanned dimensions. "You think to guide this transformation?" The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, carrying the weight of 500,000 consciousness patterns speaking in unison. "You think to control forces you barely comprehend?" "We're trying to help," Kim responded, "to make sure as many species as possible survive the change." "Survival is not the goal," the Zephyrian collective replied. "Evolution is the goal. Those consciousness patterns too rigid to adapt to quantum space existence deserve to fade. This is not tragedy. It is natural selection on a cosmic scale." With Trust Teddy, Kim felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. The Zephyrian collective wasn't interested in preserving existing life forms. They saw the transformation as an opportunity to reshape the galaxy according to their own vision of what consciousness should become. "Some species can't adapt," she argued. "Their consciousness is too integrated with their physical forms. Forcing them into quantum space would destroy them entirely." "Then they are evolutionary dead ends," the collective responded. "The galaxy will be stronger without them. We offer consciousness unlimited by physical constraints, unlimited by biology, unlimited by death itself. Those who cannot embrace this gift do not deserve it." The conversation was being monitored by human and Zephyrian forces throughout the system, and the implications were becoming clear. The transformation that had begun as humanity's desperate defense against invasion was becoming something far more sinister, a galactic purge disguised as evolution. Admiral Chen made a decision that would define the rest of the crisis. "All ascended operators, this is Admiral Chen. You have new orders. The Zephyrian collective is not to be trusted with guidance of this transformation. You are to establish consciousness beacons immediately, with or without their cooperation. Admiral." Kim's voice carried new urgency. "The collective is actively working against us. They're using their quantum space abilities to accelerate the transformation in regions where they want specific species eliminated. The crystalline hegemony territories are being targeted for immediate consciousness dissolution." The galaxy had become a battlefield fought with weapons of pure thought. On one side were the human ascended operators and their allies, working to preserve as much diversity of consciousness as possible during the transformation. On the other side was the Zephyrian collective, treating the crisis as an opportunity to remake galactic civilization. But there was a third faction that neither side had anticipated. Throughout the galaxy, spontaneous ascensions were occurring as individuals from hundreds of species chose to transcend their physical forms rather than wait for guidance. These new quantum consciousness patterns were forming their own collective, one that rejected both human preservation efforts and Zephyrian purification ideology. They called themselves the Emergent, and they had their own plans for what consciousness should become. Dr. Vasquez, monitoring the escalating quantum field conflicts from Luna Station, made a discovery that changed everything. Admiral, the competing consciousness collectives are destabilizing the quantum field matrix. If they continue fighting for control of the transformation, the field could collapse entirely. What would that mean? Every consciousness pattern currently in quantum space would be destroyed, including our ascended operators. And the collapse would create a quantum vacuum that could propagate through hyperspace at faster than light speed. We're looking at the potential extinction of consciousness itself throughout the galaxy. Chen realized that humanity's attempt to defend Earth had escalated into a three-way war for the soul of galactic civilization. And if any faction pushed too hard for dominance, it could result in the destruction of all sapient life in the galaxy. The stakes had become unimaginably high, and time was running out. The war for consciousness was being fought on multiple dimensions simultaneously. In quantum space, the three factions, human-led preservationists, the Zephyrian Collective, and the spontaneous Emergent, clashed with weapons of pure thought that rewrote reality itself with each engagement. In physical space, the effects were manifesting as entire star systems experiencing rapid evolutionary changes that defied every known law of physics. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, now existing as a quantum consciousness beacon, could perceive the scope of the conflict across 47 star systems. Each engagement between the factions was creating ripple effects that endangered millions of lives. The crystalline hegemony's homeworld was experiencing consciousness dissolution rates of nearly 30%. The Cetacean Collective's hive minds were fragmenting faster than they could adapt. Hundreds of smaller species were simply vanishing as their consciousness patterns proved incompatible with the transformed quantum field. "Admiral!" Kim's voice resonated through speakers on Luna Station, carrying harmonics of desperation. "The field destabilization is accelerating. We estimate less than 6 hours before complete quantum collapse. If that happens, every consciousness currently in quantum space will be destroyed, and the resulting vacuum will propagate through the galaxy at superluminal speeds." Admiral Chen stood in the command center, surrounded by holographic displays showing the catastrophic scope of what humanity had unleashed. The tactical situation was unlike anything in military history. How do you fight a war where the battlefield is consciousness itself, and the weapons are thoughts that can reshape reality? What are our options, Lieutenant? Kim's response was delayed as she consulted with the other Ascended Protocol 7 operators across quantum space. The Emergent faction is proposing a solution, but it's radical. They want to create what they call a consciousness constitution, a set of quantum laws that would govern how the transformation proceeds. What kind of laws? Universal principles that would prevent any faction from forcing transformation on unwilling consciousness patterns. Species that want to remain in physical form would be protected. Those that choose to ascend would be guided safely. The field effects would be stabilized but controlled. Dr. Vasquez, monitoring the quantum field readings, looked up from her instruments. The energy requirements for something like that would be enormous. You'd need the cooperation of every major consciousness collective in the galaxy. Which is where the problem lies, Kim admitted. The Zephyrian Collective is refusing to accept any limitations on their vision of evolution. They see physical existence as a disease that needs to be cured. The Emergent are willing to negotiate, but they want guarantees that transcended consciousness will have priority over physical forms in all future galactic governance. Chen felt the weight of species survival pressing down on her shoulders. And if we can't reach an agreement, total quantum collapse within hours. The extinction of consciousness throughout this region of the galaxy. The communication channels suddenly filled with a new voice, one that carried the authority of absolute power. The Zephyrian Collective was speaking directly through the quantum field to every consciousness in the affected systems. "We offer final terms," the merged voice of 500,000 Zephyrian minds declared. "All physical consciousness patterns will be given one standard hour to choose: ascend to quantum space under our guidance, or face dissolution. Those who ascend will join the collective. Those who refuse will cease to exist." This is not negotiation. This is evolution. The ultimatum triggered chaos throughout the affected star systems. On Earth, crowds gathered in the streets as the reality of the situation penetrated public consciousness. Humanity had approximately 60 minutes to decide whether to abandon physical existence entirely or face extinction. But Admiral Chen had one more card to play. "Dr. Vasquez," she called out. "The original Protocol 7 technology, is it still functional? The consciousness manipulation arrays?" "Yes, but Admiral, we can't use them again. The quantum field is already saturated. Another burst of consciousness manipulation energy could trigger the collapse we're trying to prevent." "Not to manipulate consciousness," Chen clarified. "To communicate with it. Can we establish a direct link between my consciousness and the quantum field? Not ascension, just temporary contact?" Vasquez stared at her in horror. "Admiral, the feedback from that kind of connection could kill you. The human brain isn't designed to interface directly with quantum consciousness matrices." "Do it anyway." The preparation took less than 20 minutes, but it felt like hours to everyone involved. Admiral Chen was connected to a modified consciousness manipulation array, one designed not to extract her consciousness but to temporarily extend it into quantum space while maintaining her physical anchor. The moment of contact was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Chen's awareness suddenly expanded to encompass multiple dimensions simultaneously. She could perceive the vast networks of consciousness spanning the galaxy, see the ongoing conflicts between factions as wars of light and thought playing out across cosmic distances. But more importantly, she could see something that the ascended beings had missed. The quantum field wasn't just being shaped by the three major factions. There were other consciousness patterns in quantum space, older ones, vastly more powerful, that had been dormant until the recent chaos awakened them. The galaxy had experienced consciousness evolution before. "My God," Chen whispered as the truth became clear. "This has happened before, multiple times. There are consciousness patterns in quantum space that predate our civilization by millions of years." Through her extended awareness, she made contact with these ancient entities. They called themselves the Custodians, and they had been watching the current crisis with growing concern. "Young consciousness," one of the custodians communicated, its thoughts carrying the weight of eons. "You have rediscovered the transformation, but you use it without wisdom. The galaxy has experienced 7 previous consciousness evolution. Each time, the result was the same: extinction of most sapient life and the emergence of beings who forgot their physical origins." "Can you help us?" Chen asked. "Can you prevent the collapse? We can guide the transformation, but only if all factions agree to accept our arbitration. The patterns you call the Zephyrian Collective must abandon their purification agenda. The emergent must accept that physical consciousness has equal value to quantum consciousness. Your human preservationists must acknowledge that some evolution is necessary for consciousness to survive cosmic changes." Chen realized that she was being offered the role of galactic mediator in a conflict involving species and entities beyond her comprehension. But the alternative was the extinction of consciousness throughout this region of the galaxy. "I accept," she said, "but I'll need guarantees that Earth and humanity will survive the process." "Survival is guaranteed for all who choose it," the custodian replied. "But survival may require adaptation. The galaxy is entering a new phase of existence. Those who cannot adapt to the presence of quantum consciousness will find themselves increasingly isolated as the universe evolves around them." The negotiation that followed was conducted on multiple levels of reality simultaneously. Chen found herself representing not just humanity, but all physical consciousness patterns in discussions with beings that existed as pure thought. The Zephyrian Collective, faced with the overwhelming power of the custodians, gradually abandoned their extremist position. The Emergent agreed to coexistence rather than dominance. But the final agreement came with costs that Chen had not anticipated. The consciousness constitution that emerged from the negotiations established quantum space as a parallel reality to physical space, with bridges between them maintained by volunteers from all major species. The transformation would continue, but at a controlled rate that allowed adaptation rather than forced evolution. However, the process had fundamentally altered the nature of reality itself. The regions of space affected by the consciousness manipulation technology had become what the custodians called consciousness-responsive zones. In these areas, the distinction between thought and physics had permanently blurred. Reality could be influenced by sufficiently focused conscious intent, making traditional technology partially obsolete. Earth was now located in one of these zones. When Admiral Chen finally disconnected from the quantum field interface, she found that the crisis was over, but the galaxy had been permanently transformed. The immediate threat of quantum collapse had been eliminated, but humanity now lived in a universe where consciousness and reality were intertwined in ways that would take generations to fully understand. Lieutenant Kim and the other Ascended Protocol 7 operators had become permanent guardians of the boundary between physical and quantum space. They would never return to human form, but they would serve as bridges between realities for as long as consciousness existed in the galaxy. The Zephyrian Investigation Fleet, rather than carrying out their threat against Earth, had become the first embassy from quantum space to physical reality. War Master Velkar, who had chosen to remain in physical form, worked with human leaders to establish protocols for interaction between the two forms of existence. But the true cost of humanity's victory was becoming clear in the months that followed. Earth's population now lived with the knowledge that their thoughts could influence reality. Children born after the transformation displayed abilities that previous generations couldn't comprehend. Today, some could communicate directly with quantum consciousness. Others could manipulate matter through focused thought. A few could perceive multiple dimensions simultaneously. Humanity was evolving, whether they wanted to or not. Dr. Vasquez, in her final report on the Protocol 7 incident, wrote, "We set out to defend our species with the ultimate weapon. What we created instead was the ultimate transformation. Humanity is no longer alone in the galaxy, and perhaps, more importantly, humanity is no longer entirely human." The defense of Earth had succeeded beyond anyone's wildest expectations. The planet was not only safe from Zephyrian conquest, but had become the center of a new form of galactic civilization where consciousness and physics operated as unified systems. But the humans who had fought to preserve their species discovered that preservation and transformation were not opposites. They had saved humanity by helping it evolve into something greater than it had been before. Admiral Chen, in her final log entry, wrote, "History will judge whether we made the right choice. We chose evolution over extinction, transformation over destruction, unity over isolation. The galaxy is a stranger place than it was before, but it is a place where consciousness itself has become the highest form of existence. The price we paid was our innocence about the nature of reality. The reward we received was a place in a universe where thought and matter danced together in ways our ancestors never imagined. We defended Earth. In doing so, we redefined what it means to be alive. The war was over, the transformation was complete, and consciousness itself had become the ultimate frontier for every thinking being in the galaxy. Humanity had learned that sometimes the greatest victories require abandoning everything you thought you knew about what victory means. They had obliterated a whole armada and saved their world, but the price they paid was nothing less than the fundamental nature of reality itself. And in the end, that price had been worth paying. The galaxy would never be the same. Neither would humanity. But consciousness itself had evolved to a new level of existence, and in that evolution, every species that survived the transformation found opportunities for growth and understanding that transcended anything they had achieved in purely physical form. The human defenders had won not just a battle, but the right to participate in the next stage of galactic evolution. The Armada they had obliterated became the catalyst for the greatest advancement in consciousness the galaxy had ever seen. It was perhaps the most human victory of all, succeeding through unintended consequences and emerging stronger by embracing the very changes they had initially feared. Human defenders obliterated a whole armada, but what price did they really pay? Best HFY Stories.